Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again it's time for the Q&A, so let's go ahead and get this started. Alright, first question. What is the general rate that muscle is able to be regained after detraining in your experience/opinion? 6 months of detraining, let's say, and 20 to 30 pounds of total body mass dropped. Alright, now if you dropped 30 pounds, if you're a natty, there's no way it was all muscle, okay, unless you ended up emaciated. If you ended up down at 130 pounds or something, right? You're going to have to be severely underweight, someone who looks completely like they've never worked out in their life, just like a really, really skinny guy, right? Skinny, untrained guy. So that's what you're talking about at that point. That's a lot. And again, you might not be natty, or you might be really tall. But let's look at it from this perspective. Usually, in my experience, time off equals time on. In other words, if you spend 6 months without training, it's going to take you 6 months to regain whatever you lost. Okay? 6 months. Now, a lot of people will say, well, that seems like a long time. Well, how much did you detrain? And how big were you? Someone could have 5 years of hard training experience, right? You could have 5 years of training experience. You could be benching 300, squatting 400, deadlifting 500, overhead pressing 200. 6 months detraining, lose 80% of your gains, 70% of your gains. To go back and in 6 months to regain everything that you lost is pretty good. Because what did you basically lose? You lost a year of progress. Okay? So at the 6-year mark, you've lost an entire year. You're back to where you were at the 5-year mark. So that might sound extreme to people, but it's reasonable. And as far as the rate that you gain muscle, I don't know. But I can tell you right now, you're not gaining 20 pounds of muscle in 6 months. Maybe. That's going to be pretty unusual in that scenario. Why? Because not only does it exceed noob gains. Now, detrained muscle returning is usually faster than noob gains, but some of your noob gains return immediately, so it's not the same thing. You have a lot of transient storage factors, glycogen, glucose, all those things in the muscles, right? They pump back up really quick. Okay? Some of your old hypertrophy always stays as far as the myofibrillar growth, no matter what. Once you've gained that muscle, you will always have some of it. Or some of it will return almost instantly, like within weeks. So you have to factor that in with all of this. But when we're talking about muscle growth, we have studies on anabolics that we're looking at 5 months to gain 18 pounds of muscle. Okay? So if we're talking about exceeding that, you're talking about exceeding anabolic growth rates. Or at least something that's modest. And obviously, some people use very, very high amounts compared to these studies. But you get the idea. But even then, it comes back around to the rule. If you detrain for 6 months, it's going to take you 6 months to regain what you lost. Okay? On average. And again, it's going to assume that you have any extensive amount of training. If you never finished your noob gains, like this is an irrelevant argument. Right? Completely irrelevant. So we're talking about someone who actually had several years of real training experience. But that's normal. That's been my experience. All right, next question. Who are you aware of that has the credentials to train people with disabilities to reach strength goals? Your advice is all centered around average people. True, it is. Because that's who I deal with. That's my audience. That's my training demographic, although average people are not necessarily my normal clients. My clients are actually, I'm geared towards amateur athletes mostly, or people who have very, very, very serious strength goals. So as far as that goes, credentials are irrelevant. There is no such thing as a true credential to teach someone to be a strength coach or a personal trainer or a coach of any merit. Okay, let's just get that out of the way. The best coaches I have ever met in my life have no concept of a certificate. They don't have any such thing. Okay? You've got to understand that. Most people with credentials are mediocre at best. The majority. The credentials don't mean anything. They have no meaning other than getting a job at a gym. If you own your own gym, it's not necessary. If you own your own coaching facility or business, it's not necessary. And in fact, it has no value at all. So stop looking for that. It's just a piece of paper from some organization saying that you took a test on a VO2 max or whatever bullshit they're talking about. So, who do I know of? I'd say Clint Darden. I mentioned him the other day in another Q&A. Clint Darden. He works with some definitely people with disabilities. Okay. Phenomenal coach. Who else can I think of? Jason Leonards. He does some, but I don't know that he does online. I don't think he does hybrid. I know at his facility, I think it's up in Ohio, I know he has some. So that's what you need to be looking for, strength coaches who have worked with people who have disabilities. I would even reach out to someone like Kabuki Strength, right? Chris Duffin's people. That might be of value to you. That might be of value to you. Because I know that they do some stuff with Special Olympics and stuff. Hey, so those are who you need to look for. Everyone that I named has experience with that demographic. They all have experience with it. That is what you're looking for. Experienced strength coaches with experience with that demographic. Okay, don't worry about whatever goofy ass credentials. Credentials have no value in strength coaching. Nothing. They mean literally nothing. It barely means anything for a personal trainer. It's just there so that you can get a gym job. That's the only reason. But those are all people I would look into. All right, next question. Hey Jason, what are your thoughts about progressive overload on exercises like face pulls, rear delt flies with bands? I keep it to light bands for high reps, thanks. Well, why would you need anything more than that? What is progressive overload? Progressive overload is evidence of hypertrophy. Okay, it is evidence of hypertrophy. If your closed grip bench press went from 185 to 205 for 10 reps, you know that your pecs and triceps got bigger. That's it. That is what we know. Okay? Are you going to try to program progressive overload for small, high rep, single joint exercises? Why? What do you think you're going to get from it? In fact, for movements like this, the bands can be slightly inconsistent. The range of motion, the tension, everything else is going to vary from set to set slightly anyways. You might have to do 18 reps with one exact hand position or the way you gripped it, and you could do 24 on the next set before you reach failure. Why don't you just do these to fatigue? Okay, that's the thing when you're dealing with a lot of these smaller movements. We're there to train metabolic fatigue, to work certain movement patterns to get more work in for smaller muscles. Okay? The progressive overload is already there on the big movements. You're already pre-fatigued from other big movements. So why do we worry about this at all? You can't consistently measure it. Okay, when we're dealing with some of these really small movements, because we don't have terminal ranges of motion, you have no way to even assess progression. Now let's come back to the point I just gave. At least with a closed grip bench press, you stop when you're on the chest and you stop at the lockout. Okay? It's with a constant weight, because barbells do not move for the most part, or flex around or change tension through the movement. And you have a fixed range of motion. A lot of machines, you still don't have a perfectly fixed range of motion, by the way. So you can judge progression on the closed grip bench press. We can judge progression on a box squat. You can't judge progression on a small band exercise. Or even a small dumbbell exercise. Like say you're doing a rear delt fly. Let's say you're doing rear delt flies with dumbbells. A slight torso angle difference makes the movement easier or harder. The range of motion is slightly ambiguous. So you have no way to assess it. So don't worry about it. You're training these movement patterns for fatigue or restoration as part of a larger training system. worrying about the progressive overload itself is probably largely a waste of time. And when you start doing that before long, you just start using sloppy movements and cheating and doing all sorts of stuff with the bands anyways. Attempting to progress. And doesn't really do much of anything. Alright guys, well that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time in part 2.